Hello, and a very warm welcome to the August edition of Absolute Security's Patch Tuesday updates. It's another bumper pack for us, and I'm so glad that we have Rob Brown, our resident Patch Tuesday expert, here to explain everything you need to know. And also, I'm going to put in a little advert for those of you who want to stay to the end. We've got a bit of a treat coming up for you. So stay tuned. Okay, thanks, Rob. Over to you.
Thanks, Justine, and a very warm welcome from me as well. From a very, very, very warm United Kingdom, we had another very large Patch Tuesday release. In fact, it's the second largest Patch Tuesday release. I think we're going to be looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fixes each and every month going forward. There is a star next to 422. 20 of those were actually fixed by the vendor. So we've just put those into our spreadsheet so you can see that it is already fixed. It's there for transparency. But we do have 41 criticals and 379 important. Now, one thing I would like to highlight here, which is sort of an emerging risk, is the ever increasing size of the patch payload. So this is something for all IT and security teams to be aware of. Going back to January, we had an average payload of 1.5 gigabytes, and sometimes it increased to 1.8, 1.9 gigabytes, depending on the size of the fixes. Last month and this month, the payload is over 5 gigabytes in size. We simply have not seen payloads of this size ever before. What that does is it puts increasing pressure on networks, but more importantly on disk space. The 5.5 gigabyte payload has to expand as it's being installed. So the 5.5 gigabyte payload turns into an 11 gigabyte size on the hard disk. And a lot of our customers that are especially using web Windows devices, Azure, G Cloud, those systems simply aren't able to expand as rapidly, especially some old laptops with solid state hard drives of 120 gig. Very, very difficult. So the theme today and for the rest of this Patch Tuesday webinar is how can we apply the countermeasures that are available, allowing your teams the time to prepare your environment for these ever increasing sizes. Of course, you need to utilize your your network deployment capability to ensure you're using peer-to-peer, make that as efficient and economical as possible. We have 33 more likely to be weaponized fixes in this Patch Tuesday. It's a very, very large number. One is weaponized, one is public aware. They are not the same. We have 21 jump points. Those are very specifically pointed out because the jump point allows an attacker to break out of a component into an adjoining component. My favorite example is Hyper-V. Hypervisor is a virtual environment that can be run on Windows 11, plus also servers as well. So you can have Windows 11 and a virtual Windows 11 running on that device. A jump point may allow you to move between the guest and the host and the guest, or if you have two guests running, from guest to guest. Extremely serious when you have those jump points. So being able to break out offers an additional risk, and you do need to pay particular attention to those. If we look at our bug leaderboard, elevation of privilege is still at the top. 177 fixes. That's a vulnerability that allows an attacker to gain higher permissions than they're authorized to have, such as a normal user obtaining administrator or system level access. This is what I call the enabler. It is a less severe bug than remote code execution, but elevation of privilege is usually one of the very first types of bug that starts the chain, the attack chain. Remote code execution, 112 of those. That's a vulnerability that allows an attacker to execute arbitrary code. Typically, this is ransomware and is considered usually the most dangerous. Information disclosure 84 fixes. That's where a user allows unauthorized access to sensitive information not supposed to have. And my example would be password or email addresses being read from memory. So if you can read the memory, you can read what's going through the keyboard, you can take email addresses and passwords, and that could be used in sophisticated attack chains. 21 spoofing bugs. That's a vulnerability that allows an attacker to impersonate another user, a device, or a system to gain trust or bypass security controls. 15 denial of service. That's just basically making the system unstable, making it unavailable, or using all of the resources to cause it to crash. 11 security feature bypasses. That's similar to spoofing, but that's where you evade a security mechanism, an authentication, a sandbox, in order to bypass the security that's on that process. And 3, tampering. No one really knows what tampering means, but we have 3 of those as well. Now, if you're looking at a patching strategy, then may I recommend this risk-based approach. The risk is based on not just a single factor. So you're not just looking at the criticality of the vulnerability, you're looking at many factors combined that actually allow you to choose the most important remediations. As we see the number of fixes grow, as we see the number of patches being released by Microsoft, including the feature update, including the cumulative, and then all of the .NETs as well. And then on top of that, you have all of your third parties. You can apply this risk calculator to any of those, and you can choose which ones are the most priority and deploy those first, and then which is the next priority. I don't like to say lesser priority or no priority. It simply is a different priority. And using your absolute console, you can make that decision right out of the console, starting with the vendor severity. So the vendor severity, of course, is our original source of truth. They can choose which severity they want to use when they're releasing it. They have an internal calculator. Sometimes those weaponized vulnerabilities or the 0 days are released with a severity that's not critical. That's very odd. Now there is a decision that was made by the vendor to do that. The CVSS is our ability to review that independently. The CVSS is a calculation out of 10. The vendor creates the CVSS initially, and then it is revalidated, and that can change from time to time. And that vulnerability that is 0 day, that was initially released with a vendor severity of NA, can get a bumper CVSS score of 9.2 that puts it into a critical state. Now, if you combine the two, vendor severity and CVSS score together, you have a much better idea of the severity of any vulnerability in particular, and you can use that as a selection criteria. The next two is the state of the vulnerability itself. Weaponized means it's in we are aware that it is being attacked. In NIST, it's called a KEV, known exploited vulnerability, but the vendor is aware that this is being used in an attack. Now, in a autonomous security remediation, you might want to track the weaponized state and have playbooks that automatically deploy those weaponized patches, those weaponized vulnerabilities, deploy those patches after a certain number of days following the publish date. So if it was released a day later, it can go to test teams. A couple of days later, it can start rolling out to live. It removes the human element from that decision and deploys what some are calling the most critical patches, deploy the most critical patches to resolve those weaponized vulnerabilities, especially because weaponized vulnerabilities can appear at any time. Public aware means that somebody has prepared the blueprint and has published it on the internet. on how to exactly exploit a vulnerability. Now, interestingly, about 80% of the public aware vulnerabilities never get weaponized. That doesn't mean that it won't be. So you should still use public aware as a vector in calculating your risk. If something is public aware and it's on a lot of your devices, then you should definitely ensure that that is placed in your patch deployment. You have the attack chain. And we're going to talk more about attack chains. And I think this is the way we need to start changing how we prioritize our patches based on the fact that a vulnerability could be part of an attack chain that could lead to a full system compromise. If the vulnerability could be used in an attack chain, it must be considered and therefore placed in a priority bucket higher in the initial deployment. And then lastly, countermeasures. This is our balance. If a countermeasure exists, it means that you can deploy a registry key or a policy or change something that effectively mitigates the vulnerability completely. Once you deploy the patch, you can, if the vendor recommends, remove the countermeasure. But the countermeasure gives you time. So if you can't deploy the patch, and as these patches are getting so much bigger, we simply can't deploy a 5.5 gigabyte payload across our global organization as quickly as we would want. That takes a lot of preparation. And so the countermeasures really help. If a countermeasure exists, please consider using it. And in your Absolute console, you'll find playbooks where you will be able to deploy those countermeasures. And of course, lastly, everything is around your exposure. If you have a low severity vulnerability with high exposure and is weaponized, that should be a higher priority in the deployment than a critical vulnerability that is exposed on less machines. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to pop across to our website where we have the full Patch Tuesday download available for you. If you pop across to absolute.com, you'll find out how we are the autonomous cyber resilience platform and how we stop downtime. If there's anything you would like to ask us, you can use the chat function in the corner, or in fact, if you're not an Absolute client and you would like to see our product, you can request a demo just here. Up on the resources section, just under here, you'll find our Absolute blog. This is where we post all of the articles, not just Patch Tuesday, but best practices, testing, etc., from all of our fantastic experts. And of course, here we have our Patch Tuesday write-up by myself. So just to recap, we've got 244 fixes. I simply cannot spend the next 30 minutes going through each of those. So I'm going to highlight a couple that I have selected because they are part of an attack chain or because they are weaponized. We have fixes across the entire Microsoft portfolio. In fact, the only thing we didn't have was the Xbox game that we had last month, from Office, SharePoint, Exchange, PowerShell, Visual Studio, Teams, Azure, etc. Everything was included in this release. Now we have a lot of fixes. We have certainly a lot of fixes. So I want to be strategic in ensuring that every vulnerability that we choose to deploy first will save your environment from a potential attack by removing one of those attack chains. Attackers are rarely interested, in fact, in stopping after the first compromise. I would love to know what the percentage of customers that are sort of attacked with ransomware pay the ransom and then get attacked a second time. I'm sure there is some statistics online. So what we're trying to do is make sure we remove those attack chains so that A, we can stop the attack from happening in the very first place. And if it does, we can stop it from repeating. Now we need to look back to an old vulnerability from 2023, the Windows Ancillary Function Driver for WinSock, or AFD.sys. Now we've seen vulnerabilities in this area used to turn limited local access into system privileges, which means they have complete control of the device. Back in 2023, It was used in a very successful attack. Coming forward to now, we have 68820. This is another vulnerability just like that previous one I mentioned, WinSock elevation of privilege vulnerability. And this time Microsoft has confirmed that exploitation has already been detected. An attacker still needs to get in onto the device first, but if they do, that's the attack chain, so you've got to stop it. But if they do, they could gain system level privileges. And that's why that is so important, to remove this particular chain. So if they do get access, they can't utilize this one to further increase their exposure in your environment. We also have a preview pane. Now, again, in 2023, we had a vulnerability 23397 that was exploited by a Russia-based threat actor against multiple governments, military, energy, and transportation organizations. A specially crafted Outlook message could force the victim's device to authenticate to an attacker-controlled server, at which point they could expose credentials that could be used for lateral movement and further compromise. Come forward to today, we have 63532, similar vulnerability caused by an integer overflow and heap-based buffer overflow. Microsoft confirms that the preview pane is an attack vector, which of course is why it's passed the sniff test. A malicious Office file could provide the initial code execution an attacker needs before they move to the next stage of their attack. Now, organizations could perhaps temporarily consider removing the preview pane from Outlook and Office products, allowing you the time to deploy this urgent update. Of course, you can do other things like maintaining strong email and attachment filtering, follow the Microsoft Defender attack service best practices, and of course, turning off the preview pane. And lastly, a vulnerability that is very serious, and it's about turning trust against the user. There's so many applications that we use on our devices, such as Teams, such as Copilot, such as SharePoint in this case. We trust these tools, we collaborate each other. My team, in fact, uses SharePoint to save and share files from our managed services. The vulnerability in question is 62827. It's a Microsoft SharePoint elevation of privilege vulnerability, and Microsoft states that an authenticated attacker with domain access, just domain access, could perform remote code execution on the SharePoint server and elevate themselves to SharePoint administrator. Very scary. Now, this is not a confirmed attack vector, but it is a plausible attack chain, and one that I would like to recommend using as an example to prioritize this one. If an attacker could place a malicious file into the SharePoint document library that is then shared across all of your users with a double extension. So again, this is plausible attack vectors. And the file that they place there could be called CEO salary.xlsx.exe. If the Windows devices by default have the hide known file extension turned on, which is a Windows default, then to the user, the file is called CEO salary.xlsx. It hides the executable at the end. And if your users are curious, take a copy or double click, then of course they're launching an executable, at which point whatever attack that was, unfortunately, the user is now fallen victim. Once a vulnerability like this gains control of the user's trust, unfortunately, the attacker can move forward within the organization. And that is why it's super important to apply least restrictive privileges wherever possible, monitor for unusual file uploads or permission changes, and of course, include the showing of full file extension policy across all of your devices. Inside your Absolute console, you will be able to find the policy to turn that on to make sure that any files will show the entire file name, including all of the extensions, and hopefully they don't fall victim to that. So how to be the hero this month? Well, we need to break the attack chain. It's the only way that we can prioritize our organization with so many fixes coming. So we need to prioritize anything that provides initial access. The Microsoft Office and Preview pane example that I've given you, those are low friction routes to the devices and the endpoints. Accelerate, of course, that WinSock vulnerability. It is under active attack. It's exploited, and it must be your first deployment in this Patch Tuesday release. Protect all your platforms that are trusted by your users, such as the SharePoint example I used. Make sure that you have those least restrictive permissions enabled and monitor those tools on all of the tools that you're using, not just the Microsoft ones, but the third parties as well. Look at vulnerabilities as potential combinations, just as not as single serious S scores. We've done this before on many webinars where we've said this is the one vulnerability you need to resolve, whilst attackers were using other vulnerabilities that they were able to chain together. So looking at the multiple vulnerabilities and how they can be chained together is super important. Review anything marked as weaponized, public known, and of course, if you can, deploy those independently of the routine deployment. Use the weaponize as a trigger to go and start urgently deploying those updates without any human intervention. Reduce the opportunities at each stage of the attack. Application control, least privileges, attack service reduction rules recommended by Microsoft. There is a whole bunch of CIS benchmarks that are available that you can apply to systems that will actually help you get almost all the way there in protecting that endpoint. Smart screen, of course, is a really useful way to stop users from clicking things they're not supposed to. And of course, don't stop deploying updates that are security focused. Any vulnerability, regardless of its severity, can be used in an attack chain. If you have an issue, plan a resilient strategy to roll back an update if it does cause end user disruption. Make sure that you're able to deploy those updates as quickly as you possibly can. But in the event that any downtime is caused, build your resilient strategy to put the device back so that you can find out what went wrong, retest, and roll out those updates. Don't just roll out the critical ones because you're worried about potential end user impact. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to pop across to the download. The download is the PDF that we put on our website, and it contains everything you need from the most critical to the next critical in this list. It's 27 pages. We're simply not going to have enough time to go through this here. What I'd like you to do is to take a few moments, put the CVE from here into your patch management toolset. If you have a high exposure across your environment, start building a plan. What will you deploy in your first, second, third, and fourth phase rollout? Use your data from here to make that into change management and submit and deploy as quickly as you possibly can. Lastly, we're going to talk about Windows Lifecycle. Feature updates was something I mentioned earlier on. You must keep up to date with your feature updates. 26H2, I think, is just right around the corner. We are recommending 25H2 as the most reliable so far in our experience. If you're still using Windows 10, this is the last year. This is the year when you have to start purchasing the ESU extension. 2028 is the last year you will have support for Windows 10. Windows Server 2012, this is the final year. The last year of the ESU is in October of this year. Windows 11 Enterprise and Windows Home and Pro, they do have different life cycles, so pay attention. If you're using Windows 11 Enterprise 23H2, you have till November of this year to move to 25H2, which is our recommendation. If you're using a long-term servicing branch, you have a lot more time, probably till 2030, but unfortunately that license isn't available anymore. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a lot to unpack. We love the questions and the comments, so please do feel free to reach out if you need any support from a strategy standpoint. And until September, wow, I can't believe this year has gone by so fast. Until September, I wish you happy patching.
Thank you so much for that great advice, Rob. And I'm having problems myself with the size of the documents with all the CVEs in them. It's really testing the memory on my machine, that's for sure. Right, I'm going to take control now because I promised that we were going to have some treats for you, and we certainly do. Since we're now officially in the AI era, yes, we are, I've checked, we've been working very hard to produce some new resources for you that reflect this. To start with, we have an all-new buyer's guide for patch management. And what this does is it looks at patching capabilities with an AI lens. And by that, I mean what your patching solution needs to do when there are more patches issued than you can keep up with. So not just automation, but about resilience as well. And then we also have our latest guide from our CISO research series, which looks specifically at autonomous cyber resilience. But that's not all. Our latest on-demand webinar is now available on the website. This one includes a fantastic overview of our resilience for automation capabilities, so it's well worth a look. And last but by no means least, if you're heading to Las Vegas, baby, for Falcon, and you have a need for speed, we have an exclusive event that you may be interested in. Let's take a look.
Every CISO knows. Resilience isn't tested when everything works. It's tested under pressure, when conditions change, when failure isn't an option. Join Absolute Security and Optiv for an exclusive afternoon with security leaders tackling the toughest resilience challenges facing organizations today. Real conversations. No fluff. No pitch. Then step from theory into practice. Choose your machine. Ferrari, Lamborghini, Porsche, 5 laps, 1 custom circuit. Can you maintain the pace? Stay in control? Go the distance? Because resilience isn't about surviving the first lap. It's about finishing strong. The Cyber Resilience Forum at Speed Vegas, August 30th. Reserve your seat and see how you measure up.
Oh, that looks exciting, doesn't it, Rob?
Yeah.
Don't you wish you were going to Falcon yourself?
Yeah. I never get invited anywhere.
We'll put you on the list for next time. So yes, if you're interested in attending, then please do follow the QR code here and put your name and details down to bag yourself a place. Of course, if you want to get more advice from us, as Rob said, you can go to the website and ask Abby, our AI chatbot. She's very knowledgeable. Any questions that you have, or ask an expert using the QR code here. So once again, thank you so much for your time, and don't forget to like and subscribe.